Okay, so intelligence. You know how everyone says it like peaks when we're young,
Hmm.
and then it's all downhill from there. But is that like really all there is to it?
Yeah.
Today, we're doing a deep dive. It's from this developmental psychology textbook, chapter 21. We're looking at how intelligence changes, like across adulthood.
Okay.
And get this, it's not just, about IQ scores.
Right.
We're going to look at all the different kinds of intelligence. And you know how they change as we get older.
Mm-hmm.
You might actually be getting smarter,
Well,
like in some ways, without even knowing it.
yeah, what's really interesting is that this chapter, kind of challenges that whole idea of intelligence as this fixed, like, inborn thing, like some intelligence lump in our brains,
I always pictured it like a lump of coal,
Uh-huh.
and it just shrinks over time,
Yeah.
like not very encouraging.
Right. But, neuroscience is showing us that it's a lot more dynamic than that.
Okay.
It's about, like, brain networks
Yeah.
and how they're structured and how they communicate.
So like, it's not just this one,
Right.
one thing you can
And
measure.
it's not a single lump, exactly.
Right.
And these networks, they can actually change
Okay.
throughout our lives based on our experiences.
So it's like our brains are actually, instead of shrinking, they're like rewiring themselves
Yeah.
as we learn and grow. That's kind of cool.
It is. Think about, that study they did with the London taxi drivers?
Yeah.
To get around that city, like that maze of streets, they have to memorize like a huge mental map.
Oh, yeah.
And guess what?
What?
The researchers found that their brains actually adapted. So certain areas, involved in spatial memory,
Okay.
they actually got larger. It shows how much power our experiences have to like actually physically shape our brain.
Okay, so our brains aren't just like stuck in time.
Nope.
But what about, those IQ scores we hear so much about?
Hmm.
I thought those like generally go down as we get older.
So it's actually not that straightforward. The chapter points out that different research methods, like they've kind of led to different findings.
Oh, right.
So you've got cross-sectional studies. They compare, different age groups at one point in time.
Okay.
They often show like a decline in IQ.
Yeah.
But then you've got longitudinal studies. Those followed the same people over time.
Right.
And they sometimes find that IQ actually increases.
So it's like different study, different results.
Yeah, kind of.
How do we like make sense of that?
So historical context is really important here. The chapter talks about the Flynn effect,
Okay.
which is this trend, it's fascinating, where each generation tends to score higher on IQ tests than the generation before.
So like our grandparents' generation would score lower than our parents and so on.
Exactly. And it's probably not because like genes for intelligence suddenly got better,
Yeah.
It's probably things like, better education, better food, healthcare, even things like technology playing a role.
That makes sense. I mean, we have so many more resources now, like information at our fingertips. It's almost like cheating.
Uh-huh.
But didn't the chapter say something about the Flynn effect maybe slowing down? Or even like reversing?
Yeah, that's right. There's some newer research suggesting that it might be plateauing or even declining, in some developed countries. And it could be, things like increased screen time or changes in how we're educated or other environmental things.
Wow.
It's kind of a mystery. Researchers are still trying to figure it out.
So maybe we're not all on this like unstoppable upward intelligence climb,
Right.
But if IQ scores aren't the whole picture, then how do we understand, these different parts of intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and how they change over time?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The chapter goes into this idea that intelligence isn't just one thing,
Right.
It's a bunch of different abilities.
Okay.
And they all change in their own ways as we age.
So instead of that intelligence lump, it's more like a toolbox, right?
Uh-huh.
With different tools that we get better or worse at using as we get older.
I like that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
All right. So one of the main theories the chapter goes into is this Catalan-Horns theory
Yes.
of fluid and crystallized intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Fluid versus crystallized. Okay, tell me more.
Okay, so think of fluid intelligence as like your mental processing speed
Okay.
and flexibility. It's that ability to think abstractly, solve new problems, and adapt to new situations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this type of intelligence, it does tend to decline gradually, as we age.
Okay.
And that's probably why we might find it a little harder to, learn new things or remember names as quickly as we used to.
Right, yeah. Makes sense. I definitely, I feel that, mental quickness isn't quite what it used to be.
Sure.
But what about crystallized intelligence? What's that about?
Okay, so crystallized intelligence is like the storehouse.
Right.
All the knowledge and skills you've built up your whole life.
No. Yep.
It's your vocabulary, your understanding of history, any expertise you have in a certain area.
Okay.
And the good news is this kind of intelligence, it can actually grow with age.
So even though we might slow down a little, mentally, we're still gaining knowledge and expertise as we experience more of the world.
Yeah.
That's nice to hear.
It is. It's this balance between fluid and crystallized intelligence. That's what helps us stay, pretty mentally sharp.
Okay.
For decades. Think about it. You might have trouble remembering a new password.
Yeah.
That's fluid intelligence at work.
Okay.
But you can easily remember, historical facts or solve a crossword puzzle. That's tapping into your crystallized intelligence.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how they work together. It's not just about decline. It's about different parts of our thinking evolving in different ways. But the chapter mentioned there's even more to the story than just like fluid versus crystallized, right?
Right. Right.
There was another theory.
Yes.
Robert Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence,
That's right.
which adds a whole other layer.
Mm-hmm.
He says there are 3 distinct types of intelligence: analytic, creative, and practical.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the difference between those 3?
Yeah.
And how do they show up in our lives?
Okay. So analytic intelligence, that's what we usually think of as book smarts, right?
Right.
It's being able to analyze information, think logically, solve problems with a clear right answer.
Okay.
It's, what we see measured on standardized tests and what's valued in school and stuff.
So if you're awesome at math problems,
Right.
or you can ace a multiple choice test,
Mm-hmm.
that's analytic intelligence at work.
Exactly. But, Sternberg argues that while it's important, it's not the only kind of smart that matters.
Yeah.
So then you have creative intelligence. That's all about thinking outside the box, coming up with new ideas, innovative solutions to problems that don't have one clear answer.
So that's like the people coming up with the groundbreaking inventions, writing amazing novels, making beautiful music.
Exactly. Creative intelligence, it loves novelty. It's all about finding new ways of doing things.
Okay.
And then finally, there's practical intelligence. It's all about street smarts,
Okay.
It's about knowing how to navigate the real world, all the complexities of it.
So that's less about what you learn from a textbook and more about what you pick up from experience.
Exactly. It's being able to read people, understand social situations, adapt to different environments, and find solutions to those practical everyday problems.
So if you can, calm down a tense argument with your family,
Mm-hmm.
or you figure out a clever way to get around a problem at work,
Yeah.
or you navigate some awkward social situation, that's practical intelligence in action.
Yeah. Practical intelligence, it's all about applying your knowledge and skills in the real world. And
Yeah.
it often comes from trial and error, learning from our experiences.
This is already making me think differently about what intelligence even is.
Uh-huh.
It's not just about being good at school or solving puzzles. It's about all these different ways of thinking and interacting with the world.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligence, it's way more diverse than we usually give it credit for. And understanding these different types, it helps us appreciate, the unique strengths that we all have,
Yeah.
that we each bring to the table.
Okay. I'm already starting to see how these different types of intelligence actually, show up in my own life.
Yeah.
I mean, I might not be a math whiz, but I think I'm okay at, navigating those tricky social situations and coming up with creative solutions when things go sideways.
Yeah.
But this whole thing about different parts of intelligence changing in different ways as we age,
Yeah.
it makes me wonder, can we actually do anything to influence how our brains develop,
Yeah.
over time?
That is a great question, and it brings us to this really empowering concept called selective optimization with compensation.
Ooh, that sounds kind of fancy.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this selective optimization thing.
Okay. So it's a theory. Paul and Margaret Botts came up with it.
Okay.
And basically it says that we have more control over how our thinking develops than maybe we think.
Right.
As we get older, we can actually choose to focus on certain skills
Mm-hmm.
and knowledge areas, the things that are important to us.
Right.
We can optimize those areas by practicing and putting in effort, and then we can compensate for any declines in other areas by using strategies or relying on our strengths.
So it's not just about like accepting that our brains are going to inevitably, decline in some ways. We can actually like take charge and shape how our thinking abilities, evolve.
Exactly. It's recognizing that, yeah, some things might naturally decline with age,
Right.
but we can like adapt and even thrive by being strategic, by focusing on areas where we want to excel
Okay.
and finding ways to work around the areas where we might be having, a little more trouble.
I like that. It's like taking charge of your brain's like destiny.
Yeah.
But how does this actually work? Like in real life, can you give me some examples?
Sure. Think about a musician, like
Okay.
a professional musician. As they get older, they might find that their fingers aren't as nimble or their reaction time isn't as fast as it used to be.
Right.
But they can compensate for that by focusing on other things like their musical interpretation,
Yeah.
emotional expression, or even mentoring younger musicians.
So instead of like fighting against those natural changes, they're kind of adapting their approach
Mm-hmm.
and using their experience and their knowledge to keep doing what they love.
Exactly. They're playing to their strengths and figuring out how to work around, any challenges that come up. And
Yeah.
this applies to anything, like parenting or your job or even hobbies.
This makes me think about, how people say that like older adults get more wise.
Mm-hmm.
Is that connected to this selective optimization thing at all?
Oh, definitely. As we get older, we build up this wealth of knowledge and experience.
Right.
We learn from our mistakes and our successes. We understand people better, and we get better at handling all the complicated parts of life.
Okay.
And this wisdom that we gain, it can be super valuable. It's something that younger generations can really learn from.
So it's not just about knowing, more facts.
No.
It's about having that deeper understanding of how things work
Yeah.
and how to navigate it all.
Exactly. And this ties back to, Sternberg's theory of intelligence, too. Like, as we age and get more experience, we might naturally get better at that practical intelligence, right?
Mhm.
We learn what really matters, and we focus on those things.
Right.
We get better at dealing with challenges in ways that fit with our values.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all these pieces kind of fit together.
Yeah.
But the chapter also mentioned this idea of expertise
Mm-hmm.
and how like anyone can become an expert in something, if they spend enough time and really dedicate themselves to it.
Uh-huh.
So how does expertise fit into this whole discussion about intelligence and aging?
Expertise is really fascinating because it shows how, like, the brain can actually keep growing and adapting.
Yeah.
Throughout life.
Okay.
When someone becomes an expert in something,
Yeah.
they're not just, learning more facts.
Right.
They're changing how they think.
Oh, wow. So experts actually think differently than people who aren't experts. Like what's happening in their brains?
The chapter talks about four main characteristics of expert thought. It's intuitive, automatic, strategic, and flexible.
Okay, let's break those down.
Sure.
What does it mean for an expert's thinking to be like intuitive?
Okay, so experts, they often have this like sixth sense
Okay.
about their area. Like, they can just make quick judgments and decisions based on years of experience and really understanding the patterns and the nuances of their field.
So it's not just about like knowing more.
Nope.
It's about like having this deep gut feeling about how all that knowledge actually applies,
Yeah.
in the real world.
Exactly. And that intuition, it comes from lots of practice and experience. It's not something you're just born with.
Yeah, okay.
Something you develop over time.
What about automatic? Does that mean that experts don't have to think as much?
Well, it's not that they don't have to think. It's that certain things, certain actions and skills become so ingrained from practice
Right.
that they don't need as much conscious effort, Think about like a chef, a really experienced chef. They can chop vegetables super fast and perfectly without even like thinking about it.
Or a musician, who can play this really complicated piece of music and they don't have to think about every single note.
Exactly. All those years of practice, they've made those actions automatic, so their brains are free to focus on, the bigger picture, the more creative stuff.
That makes sense. Okay, so what about strategic? How are experts more strategic in their thinking?
Well, experts are great at planning ahead, anticipating problems and having backup plans.
Yeah.
They've seen so many different situations in their field
Yeah.
that they've developed all these strategies for dealing with
So
challenges.
they're not just like reacting to things as they happen.
No,
They're thinking ahead and they're planning for different, what ifs.
exactly. And all this strategic thinking, it makes them more efficient and effective and adaptable.
Okay. And then finally, flexible. Why is that so important for experts?
Because the world is always changing, you
Right.
know? And no two situations are ever exactly the same.
Yeah.
So experts need to be able to adapt. They need to be able to use their knowledge and skills in new situations, unexpected situations.
Mm.
They can't be stuck with like rigid rules or procedures. They need to be able to think on their feet, come up with creative solutions, and adjust as things change.
So it's not just about being good at like one specific thing.
Yeah.
It's about being able to use your expertise in all sorts of different situations.
Exactly. Being flexible, it lets experts stay ahead of the curve. They keep learning and growing, and they stay relevant,
Mm.
They're lifelong learners, they love new challenges, and they always want to learn more.
This whole conversation about expertise is making me realize that, aging isn't just about loss. It's also about like this incredible potential to grow and develop. We can keep learning and adapting and even excel in new areas, throughout our lives.
Ah.
But the chapter mentioned that expertise isn't limited to just like specific professions.
Absolutely. Anyone can become an expert in something. If they put in the time and they're dedicated and they're passionate about it,
Mm-hmm.
it could be anything. Playing music, gardening, writing, parenting. It's not about like your job title.
Yeah.
It's about developing a deep understanding and skill set in something that you care about.
So the main thing here is that we can all keep learning and growing and developing our expertise,
Yeah,
no matter how old we are or what we do for a living.
exactly. The aging brain is still capable of amazing things. It can change and adapt.
Right.
The key is to challenge ourselves, follow what we love, and never stop learning.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what kind of expertise, we might discover within ourselves as we keep growing.
This whole thing about expertise is really making me think. I've always been like fascinated by different cultures,
Hmm.
and how they approach things like
Mm-hmm.
parenting
Hmm.
or education.
Right.
Does the chapter talk about, how those cultural differences might actually affect intelligence or expertise?
It does. There's a really interesting case study in the chapter that looks at that. It's about this test. It's called the Knowledge of Infant Development Inventory. Kitty.
Okay.
And it's designed to like measure intelligent parenting practices here in the US.
So it's like it's trying to figure out how much parents know about child development,
Right.
and how to support their kids in the best way.
Yeah, exactly. And studies have shown that here in the US, higher scores on this kitty test, they're linked to good things for kids, like better development, social skills,
Yeah.
emotional well-being.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
So a researcher decided to take this kitty test to the H people. They're an indigenous tribe in Paraguay, and the results were kind of surprising.
Oh, I bet. I can already imagine like different cultures probably have very different ideas about what good parenting even means.
You're exactly right. So
Yeah.
for the ache, they believe that babies should sleep with their mothers, for safety, especially in their environment, the rainforest, where there are like animals and other dangers.
Mhm.
But here in the US, that goes against the recommendations. Here, we're often told to have babies sleep separately to reduce the risk of sepsis.
Right. Right.
So it's just a really good example of how, like, cultural values and what people believe, they shape what we see as intelligent or expert behavior.
Yeah. Like what might be the best way to do things in one culture could be like totally different in another.
Exactly. It shows how important it is to understand that there isn't always one right way. What matters is whether those practices actually work, within that specific culture.
This is making me think about the whole nature versus nurture debate. Like how much of our intelligence is from our genes and how much is from our environment and our experiences. Does the chapter get into that at all?
Yeah, it touches on that classic question.
Okay.
And it acknowledges that both nature and nurture, they both play a role.
Sure.
Genes definitely give us a foundation,
Mm-hmm.
but our experiences, our environment, our culture, the chances we have to learn and grow, all of that interacts to shape how we think.
So it's not like a simple either thing.
Yeah.
It's this complex mix of stuff that makes each of us like intellectually unique.
Yeah, exactly. And the chapter really emphasizes that our brains, they stay adaptable throughout our life,
Okay.
which means we can keep learning and growing and changing no matter what our genes are.
That's pretty amazing. It means we have like more power over how we think than we might realize.
Mm-hmm.
So even though like we might slow down a bit cognitively as we get older, we can still do things to keep our brains sharp and engaged.
Absolutely. The chapter talks about how doing things that are mentally stimulating, like learning a new language or playing an instrument or even doing crossword puzzles, that can actually help. Like it strengthens those brain networks. And it might even help to kind of offset some of that age-related decline.
So it's like a use it or lose it kind of thing for our brains.
Yeah, kind of. The more we challenge ourselves mentally, the better we can maintain those abilities.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. We've debunked myths about intelligence declining with age. We've looked at different types of intelligence and how they change. We've explored expertise, and we've learned about how like adaptable the aging brain is. It's a whole new way of thinking about intelligence and getting older.
It really is. And the chapter does such a good job of challenging those traditional views of intelligence,
Yeah.
And it really shows us that we can keep growing and adapting like throughout our lives.
And to our listeners, we hope this has like made you curious about your own journey, with your own thinking. Remember, intelligence isn't just this fixed thing. It's a dynamic process, and it keeps going all throughout our lives.
Embrace it, challenge yourself, stay curious, never stop learning. You never know what amazing things your brain is still capable of.
That's a great way to end it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into adult intelligence. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the human mind.